Thanks for setting me up on that one. So I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about another occupational exposed group, so wildland firefighters. And my talk is going to be based on the literature that's out there, some of the work I've done, and then some of the perspective I've been gaining so far this summer. I'm out in Oregon right now on an interagency hotshot crew with the U.S. Forest Service, so getting a lot of smoke right now. But we haven't had any fires yet, so mostly doing prescribed burns. So there we go. So firefighters out there working on wildfires, but also working on those controlled prescribed fires are exposed to smoke. So both different kind of scenarios. One is in a more controlled way. One is, in a suppression focused, let's put the fire out. So Colleen mentioned all of the different constituents that can be released from fire smoke and can be exposed for wildland firefighters. So the volatile organic compounds, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide is a big concern for firefighters as well. So these are released all throughout kind of the combustion process for fire. So last year, at the height of fire season, over 27,000 firefighters were deployed out in the western US. So they work under arduous work conditions. Generally, for a federal firefighter, you're limited to a 16-hour day, so it's a 2-to-1 ratio. California firefighters generally do a 24-hour on, 24-hour off schedule. So if I'm out on a fire, my typical day starts at 5 a.m. for a wake up, a 6 a.m. briefing. You're out on the line by 7 a.m., 8 a.m. at the latest, and then you're working until 7 or 8 p.m. You get back into camp, you eat dinner, you go to bed. Generally no showering, just getting your sleeping bag. Personal protective equipment, you have a hard hat, some flame-resistant clothing. You're also carrying a fire shelter, which is essentially a very sophisticated piece of aluminum foil that can prevent burnovers or entrapments. So no kind of respiratory protection is worn by wildland firefighters. In addition, there's an opportunity for off-duty exposures as well. So these firefighters are housed in fire camps that are near fires. Inversions can set in into these valleys, and smoke can be traveled there. So not only can firefighters be exposed out on the fire line, but also in fire camp while they're eating and sleeping. So just kind of giving you an idea of what firefighters do out there. So starting with the resource types, kind of differentiate between hand crews. These are 10 to 20 people, and their job is to hike out and dig some fire line and put the fire out with their hands and the tools that they have. Engines can carry up to 500 gallons of water. They can drive into areas that are pretty accessible by roads, sometimes like 2x2, like off-roading roads. And then aviation resources. So these are the big tankers that you see that are dropping water and fire retardant. And those are beneficial and useful when you have firefighters on the ground to also come in afterwards and back up that resource as well. Fire crews and resources are identified by the kind of complexity that they're allowed to deal with. So a type 1 resource is someone or something that can handle that more complex situation. So our type 1 resources are the hotshot crews. They're the smoke jumpers, the ones that get dropped out of airplanes and parachute into fires. So fire line construction. So kind of taking you through what happens out on the ground. How do we put fire out? So first, you got to dig down to bare mineral soil so that you stop that flaming front, you stop that fire from burning anything else. So this is done. You have a saw team, so you have chainsaws that come through and just cut down all of the brush, generally in a kind of 10-foot wide swath. And then you'll have your diggers come in and dig down to that bare mineral soil. Just one tool after another, taking a hit and moving on. So once you have your fire line in, you have to make sure the fire doesn't cross. So you're out there holding the line. You're waiting for your fire to come up. You're looking, what we call keep your eyes in the green. So you're looking into that unburned area to make sure no embers got over there, nothing is spotting. This is generally thought of as one of the more smokier job tasks. You have bad wind, it's not great. So far, out on a prescribed burn this year, it was so bad I couldn't see in front of me, which then led me to believe, why am I standing here if I can't see any flames? So after the fire has come through, firefighters start performing mop-up. So this is putting out any smoldering material, any ash that can be carried by the wind and reignite the fire. If you're lucky, you have an engine nearby, so you have some water, you're pumping through some hose lay. If you're unlucky, you're carrying a 45-pound backpack pump, and spraying it by hand. Or you're just digging into, you're taking cold dirt and putting it on the hot ash, and you're just mixing in that dirt, mixing in that ash all day long. So engines can pump water. Not only can engine operators be exposed to smoke, but also those diesel fumes that are coming off of the engines as well. And then firefighters performing firings, this is often a task for prescribed fires, the ones who are lighting the fires. This is done with a torch that has a mixture of diesel and gasoline. And then on fires, like wildfires, you hear the term fighting fire with fire. So this is when firefighters are performing a backburn. So they're trying to burn any unburned material between the fire line that they've constructed and the main fire that's coming ahead. So previous firefighter studies have looked at generally exposure to different sizes of particulate matter and also carbon monoxide. So previous studies have found an increase in inflammation marker, a decrease in lung function, and then kind of the first study to really try and look at what are those long-term health impacts, looked at the years of wildland firefighting with self-reported health outcomes and found an increase in blood pressure, an increase in heart arrhythmia, and an increase in knee surgery, which at first I thought that was really surprising until I put a 30-pound pack on and went down a really steep hill. And then looking at some studies that are looking at pre-season and post-season assessment. So this is looking at the course of a whole fire season, see an increase in airway response, a decrease in lung function, an increase in inflammation, and an increase in respiratory symptom score. So then looking at some recent work that's been done, this is data that was collected by the US Forest Service between 2009 and 12, and this is going out on the line, connecting small industrial hygiene monitors to firefighters, following them throughout an entire work shift, looking at what kind of job tasks are they doing, what are the environmental factors out there, what is the fuel type, what is the wind doing. So looking at what are those factors and how are they associated with exposures. So looking at carbon monoxide, PM, and silica, and crystalline silica, we see that crew type plays a role into what firefighters are being exposed to. Generally, they found that those type 1 resources actually had lower exposures, and we kind of attributed that to they're more highly trained. So, they may be able to get themselves in and out of smoke a little easier. And then looking at work activity. So that for firefighters performing mop-up and holding were generally associated with higher exposures as well. And then the time spent doing those tasks. Some of the work that I've been working on, this is part of my dissertation, was looking at polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon exposure for firefighters. So looking at naphthalene, which is a suspected human carcinogen, we found that firefighters performing holding were most exposed on wildfires, and firefighters performing firing and holding were highly exposed on prescribed fires. And then looking at benzoate pyrene, same thing, firefighters performing holding were also attributed to having higher exposures, and then firing and holding. So holding is when you have your fire line, it's all cut, and the fire is coming towards you, and you're standing there to hold the line. You're making sure that that fire does not cross. So then taking that exposure data again and looking at some exposure response relationships that were developed by Arden Pope, I believe that was his 2011 Environmental Health Perspectives paper, looking at using that relationship and then using those field measurements of PM4 and then looking at heart rate to estimate breathing rate, we were able to calculate dose of PM for wildland firefighters to really try and understand what is that long-term health risk of lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. So we did this under 2 exposure scenarios. So one of them being a short season and a long season. So the short season being a firefighter that works a 500-hour overtime season, and a long season being a firefighter that works a 1,000-hour overtime season. And that sounds like a lot, but that's their goal. Their goal is to work the summer as much as they can. I think in 2017, I hit 950 hours. So it's doable, it's tiring. But then looking at across career duration, we were able to calculate excess risk for lung cancer and cardiovascular disease. So for a 5-year career, someone has an excess risk of 8% for lung cancer. For cardiovascular disease, that's up to 16%. And then looking at the long season and a career duration of 25 years, which is really, that's gonna be your hotshot superintendent. They've been doing this their entire lives. they're looking for that long season. They're at an excess risk for lung cancer of 43% and an excess risk of cardiovascular disease of 30%. So currently, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health is undergoing a 3-year study of wildland firefighters, really to look at, what is that multiple season like? Are firefighters able to recover in the winter? Are they able to, get that lung function back? So they're doing pre-season, post-season assessment on a little over 100 firefighters right now, and also doing some mid-season industrial hygiene sampling as well. So kind of my experiences so far and, kind of where I'm thinking of the future and research challenges is it's a dynamic environment. Every single day is different. Some days I don't even see smoke. Some days I don't even see fire. Some days it's this, and I was in clear skies and then walked straight into smoke and was there and, walked back out and it was clear again. So really trying to understand what is that variability, what is an average exposure like, and then what does that mean for health? So access to incidents and study subjects. I had no idea that when I proposed this project to John Baum's over there that I would become a wildland firefighter, but that's what I did, and it's been giving me this great perspective, what is gonna work out on the ground to protect health. And part of that is training, so getting our firefighters to understand these are hazards. Smoke is a hazard, and I hear all the time from firefighters, well, it's not a burning building, so it's safe. No, it's still burning material. There's still chemicals coming off of burning wood. So that culture too, we saw it in the clip from the Cal Fire firefighter as well, is there's a culture of this is what we've done, this is what we've always done, you need to suck it up. And just really trying to empower everyone to make decisions that can better their health. So there's no approved respirator for wildland firefighters right now. And then looking at research gaps that, we've seen the Camp Fire, the Santa Rosa fires. Firefighters are not just being exposed to wood smoke, it's also these burning buildings as well. There's also dermal exposures. A lot of firefighters, it's a badge of honor to not wash your clothing. It's a badge of honor to not take a shower for 14 days. Personally, I love sleep, so I don't shower for 14 days. But, people look down on someone who has clean Nomex. They want to trust someone who has that dirty shirt. So trying to develop occupational exposure limits based on long-term risk, looking at the mitigation and exposure strategies to reduce exposure. Have they been working? One thing we recommend is people who are holding to rotate people and crews in and out of those heavy smoke areas. For mop-up, only mop up to secure the line. There used to be kind of an arbitrary, go 500 feet in from the fire line, really. And are those mitigations working? Are we reducing exposures? And then thinking about what is firefighter versus public exposure. If we don't want to see smoke in our air and we're asking the firefighters to suppress that, how are we transferring that risk and what does that look like? So that's all I have. Thank you.